You know, I've been involved with the, well, originally from the States, as you can hear, from Minnesota. They call us the Frozen Chosen, which is what the Episcopalians also call themselves, I think. But I've been here for, I'm an anthropologist by profession. I've been here for 40-some years and counting. I'm up for parole any day. I've served my sentence. I mean, with everything else, I've been, you know, very active all these years on the Israel-Palestine issue. And I'm the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, which is an Israeli political group that's dedicated to actually, we're a big picture group. We want to try to achieve a just peace between Palestinians and Israelis. But in order to give a focus to that work, we focused on the issue of house demolitions. You know, Israel's demolished around 50,000 Palestinian homes in the occupied territory since 1967. That doesn't include 1948. It doesn't include what's the demolitions inside Israel that go on all the time against the Palestinian citizens. So that's been my work. But again, I've always been political. From my point of view, you know, activism has to be connected to something. What are you being active for? And that's my criticism actually of BDS as well. I always supported BDS, but what are we BDSing for? Well, you know, we're missing, and Rod and I have talked about this endlessly, we're missing an end game today. Actually, Rada is one of the few Palestinians, which is really important, that actually is talking about an end game, a one-state solution that I think is also where you have to go. But here, neither the Palestinians or the Israeli left is really talking about a solution. So I feel a little bit stuck. Because, you know, we could always build another house. In fact, this summer, if anybody's interested, we have an annual rebuilding camp. We will rebuild Palestinian homes. This summer, we're going to build in the Jordan Valley and in the Negev. So people are welcome. If you want more information, let me know. You know, we can always build another house. I can always write another book. I can always go to another demonstration. But my question is, to what end? And so I've been working, that's really what I'm trying to do politically, is to try to somehow get both the Palestinians and the Israeli left to talk more about solutions and begin to develop strategies and advocacy and so on. But because I felt stuck, to tell you the truth, you know, I wrote a book about demolitions and about the conflict. It's called An Israeli in Palestine. That's another book I wrote. But I just didn't want to keep going on and on and on, just doing the same old without a solution. And so rather than retiring, which is hard for an activist to do, I decided to look at it's been in my mind for a long time. The way I opened the book, War Against the People, is with the question, how does Israel get away with this?
Yes.
I mean, that's always in my mind for years and years and years. And, you know, I mean, there's massive violations of human rights. You know, it's brutal. I mean, the occupation is known already. It's in the media. People understand it's happening. Violating dozens of UN resolutions, messing up the entire Middle East, if not beyond. I mean, on and on and on, human rights and so on. How does Israel get away with it? And that was, so I thought you know, the usual explanations didn't quite work. You know, the Jewish lobby in the United States. Okay, well, it has clout, certainly. I don't think it runs the United States. And you have a lot of countries that are very pro-Israel that don't have a Jewish lobby. You know, one of the most pro-Israel countries in Europe is Poland. It's also anti-Semitic. So you've got a whole, Egypt is probably one of the most pro-Israeli countries. They don't have a big Jewish lobby. So in other words, that explains certain things in certain places, but it's not an overall explanation. Well, Christian fundamentalists as a political lobby. Again, in the United States, they have a lot of clout. And it's true that they have a lot of influence, especially in the Republican Party, of course. But again, you have a lot of countries, in Europe especially, but not just in Europe, all over, that don't have a big Christian fundamentalist population, but are still very pro-Israel. And then you get the whole, guilt over the Holocaust. Well, I mean, that works in Germany. I don't think young Americans have ever heard of the Holocaust. So I don't think that has a tremendous influence on American, or a lot of other countries as well. I mean, China has become super pro-Israel. India, the countries that were the backbone of the pro-Palestinian movements all these years, China, India, Nigeria, Brazil, have all become very, very pro-Israel, actually. I mean, in lip service, they're still talking about the Palestinians, but in actual fact, there's a whole love affair going on with Israel. And has nothing to do with the Holocaust or any form of guilt. As a matter of fact, Israel has a love affair today with Saudi Arabia that could very well open an embassy here, the Gulf states, and so on. So what's going on? In other words, it's even beyond how's Israel getting away with it. Israel's international status is improving all the time. I mean, it's a superstar. Israel was elected into the OECD, about 5 years ago, which is the club of the most advanced economies in the world. So at that time, there were 25 economies. The United States, the G7, the G20, Europe, and Japan, the strongest economies in the world are in this exclusive club. And to be elected into this club has to be unanimous. So and one of the preconditions for getting in is a certain amount of adhering to human rights and international law. There is a human rights clause in getting into the OECD. Well, here you've got 25 countries, including those that in lip service are very critical of Israel. You have Ireland, Norway. To get in, it has to be unanimous. So one country could have said no, and Israel wouldn't have been in this exclusive club that has tremendous economic and political clout. And Israel was elected. And it doesn't matter that it violates the preconditions, that its economy really, it has a good economy. It isn't quite at the OECD level. So they even did it a favor. So the question goes beyond how does Israel get away with it, and it gets really into the realm, what is Israel? What's the source of Israel's clout? What's going on? So as I was casting around for that, there's kind of something that hits you in the face if you don't just wipe it away all the time and you confront it. And that's, of course, Israel's military clout in military security and policing, coming out of his experience with the occupation. Another question you could ask, that I'd ask, is why didn't Israel accept the two-state solution 30 years ago when the PLO offered it? It's a super pro-Israeli solution. And in those days, the Likud wasn't so strong. During the whole Oslo process, it was a labor government with merits. The settlers weren't a function. The religious weren't a function. And still Israel didn't even really consider, has never considered seriously a two-state solution. How do you explain that? In other words, normal politics can't explain it. This is a solution that would have resolved this conflict on a super pro-Israel basis. Israel would have ended up with 78% of the country, even though it's going to be a minority population of this country. And it would have peace not only with the Palestinians, at the cost of what? At the cost of Tulkarm, you know, and with the entire Arab world, and the whole region would have been different. Why didn't Israel do that? And again, you can't blame the settlers, you can't blame the Likud, you can't. I mean, there's a lot of things you can blame, but what everything kind of came back to was this issue that the occupied territory is not a burden on Israel, and it isn't even, I mean, today maybe more so with the rise of the right, it isn't even a nationalistic, religious kind of a thing, but it's a resource. If you see the occupied territory as a resource, and this is where Israel, on Palestinians, who are the guinea pigs, basically, tests and develops weapon systems, systems of control, population control. I write in my book for years about the matrix of control. Well, that's something, the matrix of control is something that can be exported. Surveillance systems. You know, you get 600 checkpoints in the West Bank with millions of people passing through all the time. You know, with all, it's a laboratory. You get every nice systems and Varen systems, all these Israeli surveillance companies that are experimenting with biometrics. Palestinians have to have magnetic badges. Palestinians have, in other words, you can require Palestinians, if they want to go through, to do certain things that you couldn't require outside of a laboratory. You have an entire population that you can experiment on. Security systems, and down to policing, of course, because, okay, so first of all, this gets into a whole area. This starts to answer the question, both how did Israel get away with it, and also why didn't it want to give up the occupation? It gets into what I call security politics. In other words, it's counterintuitive. You have normal international relations. You know, the way we all think about international relations. We have friends, and there's enemies, and there's different ideologies, and there's different interests, and national interests. And, you know, we've got the whole world, there's a whole argument now, is Russia our enemy or our friend? And it gets confusing sometimes, but basically we've got sort of the world pretty much organized on that basis. Well, when you put the military, security, and policing into the equation, a whole different constellation begins to emerge. Do you know, and this is one reason why I wrote this as an activist, if you take today the military, domestic security, like homeland security, and policing, and prisons, actually, if you want to put them in as well, are today one package. They're one, you can't separate them anymore like you used to. And if you take these industries together, they amount to a $2.5 trillion a year industry. $2.5 trillion a year, that's a pretty major industry. And so I'm saying to myself as well, I mean, to be a political activist, and you want to change the world, make the world a better place and all of that, and you don't know anything. I mean, I wrote a book about something I know nothing about. I don't know nothing. I didn't know anything about a $2.5 trillion industry of violence. I mean, that's a kind of a big gap. So, but if you take $2.5 trillion and you stick it into international relations, all of a sudden you begin to understand relationships, you begin to understand why China has become pro-Israel. After Russia, Israel is the #2 arms supplier to China.
Wow.
You know, 2, 3, it vies with France, actually. And India, after Russia, Israel and France are 2, 3 in supplying the military needs to India. These are the 2 largest armies in the world. And Israel is #2 or 3 in terms of arms supply. And it's not just arms supply. But Israel, you see, Israel can't produce what are called major platforms, battleships, F-35s, or even F-16s, you know, these big fighter jets. Although Israel has produced a fighter jet that it exported years ago, but it had to discontinue it. It was just too much. It can't produce, it does produce a tank, actually. I mean, they do produce some of these platforms, but not really in a way that they can export it. It's still a small country. So what Israel has to do, and I write about this in the book, is what actually the Ministry of Defense calls niche filling. You look around the world, now from Israel's point of view, security politics is important because we want everybody. I mean, there's countries that Americans have never heard of. I think the Americans, because they're the hugest military power by far, like Equatorial Guinea, that aren't very important, not strategically, not, you know, so, but they're a vote in the UN. They're part of Africa. So for Israel, every single country is important, you know, and niche filling is everything from the F-35. I mean, the F-35 stealth bomber is the cutting edge American airplane at the Pentagon, like $1 trillion airplane. That's useless, but you know, it's part of the pork barrel of the United States. But it doesn't matter. This is a super sophisticated airplane. Well, Israel could never produce it by itself. But a lot of the cockpit of the F-35 is Israeli. And the cockpit's kind of an important part of the plane. So the targeting systems, the navigating systems, laser systems, every air force in the world uses what's called a targeting pod to target, you know, when you're targeting your missiles. Israel produces that. There's a kind of a helmet that goes over the pilot's eyes that Elbit, an Israeli company, has developed, in which all the controls are in front of you. If you're you know, piloting an F-35, you don't have to look around at the controls and you know, everything's in front of you. And now they're developing technologies where you can operate systems by moving your eyes. I don't know what happens if you know, fly in your eye could set off World War III. But you know, so these are the super sophisticated systems that Israel develops for those kinds of countries. So that in a way you can't produce enough. I won't go that far to say you couldn't produce, but Israel plays a key role in terms of these high-tech things. And again, and I keep coming back to this, on the basis of the Palestinian guinea pigs. Because one reason why Israel is able to develop all these face recognition systems and avionics, it's called, these electronics, is because of checkpoints and all the ways in which they're monitoring and controlling Palestinians all the time. So that's what gives Israel an edge. I mean, it's not that other countries don't develop these technologies, but they do it in conventional ways. They have laboratories and they have this. Here you've got a real laboratory. I mean, this is real time. And if you go into the websites of all these companies, there's about 250 Israeli military companies that export and security companies. You go into their websites, they're all saying combat proven, combat tested. I mean, that's what gives them the edge. And of course, the tested on Palestinians. So you've got that Israel does that kind of a niche film. But at the same time, now what I also, and I can go country by country and explain why that country is doing business with Israel, and what the political benefit is for Israel. I mean, I'll give you one tiny example. A couple of years ago, Nigeria was a part of the Security Council. And the Palestinians brought a resolution to the Security Council to try to put a timeline on negotiations. to say instead of negotiations going on forever, let's have a timeline where we really get into these final status things. And a Security Council resolution that's binding is very powerful. Now, they knew the United States was going to veto it. But that was, in a way, part of the game, just to sort of show the world, you know, who's for us and who's the problem. Well, to get the United States to veto it, it meant you needed a majority of the other members to vote for it. That would force an American veto. And Nigeria was the swing, and Nigeria has always been very pro-Palestinian. I mean, it has a large Muslim population, but in general, like many African countries, it was very pro-Palestinian. And they built on Nigeria. Comes the vote, Nigeria abstains. And then the whole thing fell, and the U.S. didn't have to veto. So the U.S. was off the vote, you see. And Nigerians explained later that it's because of Israel helps Nigeria in terms of Boko Haram. Now, the Boko Haram issue is an interesting one because, you know, there's an international arms embargo on Nigeria. Because it turns out that the Nigerian army is no better than Boko Haram in terms of its brutality towards the population. Israel doesn't care about that. Israel bypasses those kinds of boycotts, UN boycotts. For example, on blood diamonds, you know, Israel is one of the leading diamond centers of the world, was a way of bypassing the blood diamond issue. And of course, Israel also in Nigeria protects the Shell oil and other oil facilities, installations off the coast of Nigeria. So it was really, and they actually said that it's because of Israel's military assistance to Nigeria at a time when no one else would help us that we changed our vote. You see, so there's a very direct connection between Israel's ability to fend off hostile. I mean, the UN resolution we just had, of course, was a UN resolution. It was nice and everything else, but it had no sanctions to it. So Israel really doesn't care about that so much. I mean, it's, you know, it'd rather not be condemned, but if it doesn't have sanctions, it really doesn't matter so much. And it doesn't have sanctions because you know, the deal is between Israel and countries says, look, you can criticize us. You know, we're not going to, you know, we don't want to get to a point where we're trying to shut you up. You know, there's this whole thing, you know, I don't want to feel as a country that Israel's telling me what to do. But the understanding is you can criticize us, you can vote in the UN, this and that, down to the point of sanctions. You don't do sanctions. You don't really do anything that harms us or forces us to leave the occupied territory or anything. You know, and so that's, and again, I think weapons is really important for that. It's not just weapons, though. Now, it has to do with weapons as well. Because, you know, you take Equatorial Guinea, which is one of the worst countries. You take almost every country, and Israel is very involved. And I'll go further and I'll say this. I'd say it semi-provocatively, but I think there's a kernel of truth to it. That Israel has more military reach than the United States. You say, whoa, how could that be? The Pentagon's budget is $1 trillion a year. You know, the United States has bases in like 170 some countries. But the American presence is kind of thin. In other words, you have bases in different countries, but you know, they're fairly confined. They're like little McDonald's lands, and you fly in and out, and you sail in and out, but you're not that much in the society itself, sort of. You know, it's there, but it's based in that place, but it's not always operational in that particular country, you know. Whereas if you look at Israel, Israel only has 2 bases abroad, both in Muslim countries, which is interesting. One in Azerbaijan, where Israel is very strong in Azerbaijan, which has one of the worst human rights records in the world. And the other one's Eritrea, that has probably the worst human rights record in the world. Beyond that, Israel doesn't have bases. But you go to virtually every country And I'm talking about countries that you would think have no relations with Israel, like Saudi Arabia, or I wouldn't be surprised if there was some Iranian connection. At least, certainly, maybe not officially, but I'm sure, I sort of know that Israel keeps up contacts with the Iranian military, because it wants to be positioned for a point when the regime at some point collapses in some way, that Israel can come back, because it was a very close ally of Iran for many years. So that Israel's in places you don't expect. Again, China, India. You have this country, this idea of counter-hegemons in the world. You have Euro-American hegemony today, but there's an up-and-coming block of countries that are starting to challenge that. The BRICS countries, if you've heard the term BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That just set up, for example, a new bank, the New Development Bank, which is a rival to the World Bank, because the World Bank isn't really serving third world countries. And then there's another block of countries that are coming into that called the Mint countries, which is Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. In other words, these strong economies beginning to come together. Well, everybody talks about how much Israel loves the United States, and Netanyahu is speaking to Congress every 3 weeks, and the most loyal ally in the Middle East. Israel is super strong in every single one of those BRICS Mint countries, supplying military and security, so that it's there, but also in countries that are poorer and really are despotic. Israel supports the military. So what I'm saying, not just the military, what I'm saying in terms of global reach, is that you'll find Israel militarily involved in virtually every country. But you'll also find Israel training your special operations forces, and training the presidential guard, which is kind of a paramilitary thing to keep the dictator in power, and training the security services. I mean, one reason for the alienation of Israel and Iran is Israel, and with the CIA, really created the Savak, which is this terrible Iranian security service. But that's all over the world, Israel does that. And you'll find Israel training your local police. So in other words, what it might be missing in terms of bases like the United States, it makes up for in depth. Because you'll go in and you'll find Israel just in your neighborhood, training your local police. I'll give you one American example. Just the Gili Center, which is a big center of Israeli training American police on the campus of Georgia State University in Atlanta. Funded by Home Depot, if you want a BDS target. This Bernard Marcus, who runs Home Depot, funds this exchange of Israeli and American police. 100,000 American police have been brought to Israel over the years for training. You can imagine what that means. And the Israel weapons industry, that's the Israeli company that makes the Uzi submachine gun, which is the most popular submachine gun in the world, and other weapons. They have a whole camp, because it's all coming together, like I said, military, security, police. So they're developing weapons that blend military and civilian weapons. So now the Israel weapons industry produces an Uzi that's kind of a big pistol. So you don't have to hold an Uzi with 2 hands anymore. And these are weapons that the target is law enforcement. Is police. So that Israel Weapons Industries have opened a factory in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to produce these hybrid military police weapons for American police forces. It even sells as a weapon that's called the X-95, which is a combination assault rifle, a submachine gun, and carbine. In other words, there's interchangeable interchangeable
Stock.
not the stock, the barrel. The barrel of the gun is so you can do, but it's one gun that can do those three things. Why carbine? A carbine rifle you hunt deer with. Why the carbine? Because even in American law, it's hard to buy an assault rifle or a submachine gun. Not impossible, but it's more difficult. A carbine you buy across the counter in Walmart. So by putting a carbine component in, Israel has opened up. It's got probably hundreds of millions of potential customers in the United States. So you can buy this X95 assault rifle submachine gun for $1,200 in Walmart or across the counter. So that all this is part of Israel's economics, of course, but more than that, it's a part of its political clout. Because you get not only the American military, let's say, but the police begin to be lobbyists for you as well. The police want to be, they want to be trained. They want counterterrorism. They want these kinds of weapons. And so Israel, it's a part of this security politics. But in addition to that, I also put this, so I can go country by country. But there's a bigger thing, and I'll stop. Maybe I'll stop on this. I could go on for a long time. But, I also put this in the context of global capitalism, which is that's the big system we live in. We all live in the capitalist system. There is no other system anymore. And as we know, capitalism is in crisis. It's unsustainable. It's exploitative. It's violent. If you want, some of you are church related, so if you want a real theological concept, the whole idea of surplus humanity, I think is probably the theological concept of our time. Corporations look at the vast majority of human beings as being surplus because they'll never be educated to a meaningful degree. They'll never get skills. And worse, they'll never be consumers. 80% of the world's population lives on less than $2 a day. 80%. Well, if you live on $2 a day, you're not a consumer. You can't buy, so why should we? So we warehouse you. It's very much similar to the Palestinians. I'm saying the Palestinians are being warehoused by Israel because Israel won't even give them autonomy, won't even give them the trappings of something, even a Bantustan. The control is absolute, and Palestinians are being warehoused. I think it's worse than apartheid. I'm not going to get into that. But warehousing is a concept that's brought, Angela Davis has really popularized the concept of warehousing. Because you have prisoners. At any rate, so most of humanity is being warehoused. Well, people don't get warehoused in a prison voluntarily. So they resist. There's different kinds of resistance going on in the world. And as, in a sense, this crisis continues, the income disparities are huge, and so on. Even the young generation, if you look at the Occupy movement, even the young generation of middle-class kids are being excluded from the system. Most of your kids won't have the standard of living that you have. Not to mention job security. That's one reason why the young people today aren't very political, in many of them, because they just don't have that space to be political. They're so concerned, and rightly so, about just getting a job. So as this whole system starts to close down and become more and more exploitative, it has to become more coercive. And it has to go, capitalism always worked on the happy principle, of consensus and co-optation, Ronald McDonald and Hollywood and all the toys you get and the entertainment. Well, that's starting to wear thin. It's still useful, but it's becoming more and more, the resources are getting scarcer. Wars today are what we call resource wars. to a large degree. Not wars of ideologies and so on. And the world's most valuable resources tend to be under the feet of the world's poorest peoples. So you have this, as capitalism, whether it's in the global north or the global south, starts to close down and get more coercive and more exclusivist and more unequal, it has to begin to be more violent. And that's what I call, that's the title of my book, Wars Against the People. That's where the military and the security and the policing come together. So police forces are being militarized. You see that all over the place. Police forces are being militarized, but the militaries are being policified. Because militaries aren't being sent to win wars anymore. They're being sent for nation building, regime change, winning hearts and minds, pacification, peacekeeping, all kinds of things. So it's starting to all come on a global way. And what I'm suggesting is that Israel becomes the go-to country for the cutting edge of warfare today, which is counterinsurgency. Counterinsurgency. In other words, wars, the way we think about wars, are gone. Yeah. The last meaningful interstate war was the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. The last war that in which the major powers of the world engaged with each other was World War II. Or Korea, maybe, is a tail end of, to Korea. And that's it. You don't have those kinds of wars anymore. So wars are beginning to be wars of counterinsurgency, wars against the people, and they're beginning to be wars internal, not only external. I mean, you certainly see that today in the United States. What's going on with these bans and with, fears of internal, and it's all part of of course, the manipulation of the capitalist system to instill fear and polarization and co-opting us. So this whole thing of see something, say something. At the airports, we begin to tell them, we begin to spy on each other. We're all suspicious of each other. It divides us all, and it allows the powers that be to, we expect them to protect us, so we give them willingly all that power. What I'm saying is that in this world of counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, and there's a million words for it: asymmetrical wars, low intensity conflicts. There's concepts like wars or operations. I mean, you have Operation Desert Storm. It wasn't a war. So you see, all these things are coming. So as you get all of that, that's Israel's big niche. That's my bottom line. Israel's niche is not helping the United States beat the Soviet Union. Israel's is working with the United States and every other country in terms of controlling populations. Whether we're controlling Afghanistan or Iraq or Mexico or internally our own populations, those kinds of technologies, surveillance systems, security systems, policing, the matrices of control, and getting into the weaponry and so on, that's a whole huge area that Israel has perfected on the Palestinians. And I think it explains, that niche filling explains why Israel gets the international support it gets. And it also explains why Israel doesn't want to give up the occupation, really. Because this is important not only politically, but of course economically as well. Israel's known as a startup nation. It's famous for that. It's a startup nation because it's all based on the military, of course. So it becomes a whole self-perpetuating circle like that of things, and that's what I try to write about.